Welcome guys, gals, non-binary pals to this week's episode of Buffy Boys, your weekly review of Buffy the Vampire Slayer from a queer, feminist and literary perspective. My name is Joel, and with me as always is my hibernal co-host
Brian. Hi. Hibernal?
It is a adjectival version
Hiberno?
of winter. So you have vernal for spring, you have autumnal for autumn, and hibernal for winter.
I presume you meant hiberno, so I'm calling me Irish.
Yeah, it's all kind of tied up in there. Brumnal is also a more archaic version of the same word.
Though I suppose hiberno is the adjectival version of it, right? In the sense that it comes from Hibernia, who is in the same way. What's her name? There's a Britannica. Britannica is the female personification of Britain. I don't know any other examples, but Hibernia is the woman who represented Ireland in the
giant magic lady who
and,
used to be the queen of the country in the 4th century.
Exactly.
9,000 feet tall. So we are here to talk about Season 3, Episode 14 of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Bad Girls.
Indeed.
So Brian, you want to kick us off with Buffy and summary? And I will just warn our listeners, if you're hearing any particularly rich, velvety tones, maybe some oaky undernotes to my narration this week, and indeed in future weeks, I have undertaken a vocal coaching course for professional purposes since we've last been together. I'm hearing a lot of paper rustling over there, Brian. It can't be good for me.
Sorry. I will note, it sounds like you've just made that up, that you were doing it for professional purposes. You really did. It was actually professional, it was for work. So
it's all starting to bleed together, because I do bring my podcasting mic to work for something during the week. So it's the walls are falling apart. But please, Brian, in your own time, the Buffy and summary.
Okay, so this is first aired on February the 9th, 1999. It was written by Doug Petrie, who also wrote Revelations, and it was directed by Michael Lang, who had also directed Surprise and Band Candy to this point. Okay, so here's a Buffy and summary. Faith talks Buffy into doing things her way, neglecting school to burn out vampires, taking silly risks, stealing weapons from a store, mocking uptight, cowardly new watcher Wesley, dancing sexily together. The mayor becomes invulnerable on schedule, fighting the vampire minions of Demon Balthazar. Faith accidentally kills Deputy Mayor Finch. Buffy is appalled. Faith does not care. It's so Friends sometimes. It's actually insane.
Yeah, but I have to say that was all fairly accurate. That was a laundry list of things to happen in this episode, by and large.
I just feel like I could do a much better version of these. I really do. I know it's just hilarious because I can't write or talk concisely in any way. But anyway.
What you need to do is a side Twitter, Buffy as Friends.
Oh, I would love that.
That's actually a great idea.
I will do that.
Patent pending.
So
we're in the bronze. We're near the slushy / cappuccino / potentially liquor counter. We're listening to one of our favorite songs in the bronze, Transylvanian Concubine.
It's by Portishead might play at some point. Portishead. Great.
And I'm asking you, Brian, we're coming to the end of the decade now. You're one for lists. I'm usually a list maker in the house for boring things like milk and I was gonna say bees, but that's not really what I was trying to say. I meant money.
Okay.
But you like to make lists around tops, all kinds of tops, top 10s, top 50s, albums, films, games, etc.
I do actually. It's one of those things I really enjoy, for whatever reason. So I do love making lists of top movies and stuff. So yeah, we were talking about this beforehand. We were trying to scribble down a couple of notes on what our top movie, album, and TV show of the decade are. And I'm just occurred to me there that neither of us thought to include books there, which is very depressing. Yeah, we're supposed to be book people, but you know what? I don't read current books these days. Though Annihilation, that was the century. So that's good. Yeah,
that's very briefly. That's an interesting one because I know it is important to keep up with new releases and support new authors. It's never been quite how we tend to engage.
Yeah,
I read literature.
I read an essay once about why you should never read books that are under 30 years old because the critical consensus hasn't settled on it yet. And it's incredibly bad advice, but it's also great for me because I really like older books. I really like pre-50s stuff. So I was like, well, I'm doing it because I'm smart and cool.
It's also kind of starting to become challenging as many of our friends and peers are starting to publish their own work. Like, I'll read this in about 30 years.
I did say that to Oisin recently, which was bad of me. Okay, so let's start with movies. I had a couple of ideas here, but I did come down really strongly on one movie, and I think it's not the one you're thinking, funnily enough.
Okay.
So you would have presumed I would say...
In Manchester by the Sea.
That's exactly what I was thinking of going. Manchester by the Sea and Moonlight were both high up there. Those movies got released within weeks of each other, which is mad.
This is by far not the first time you said this to me, but
we went to see those two movies within a week of each other. That was the best week of my life. Moonlight and Manchester by the Sea are both perfect expressions of cinema in their own way. I think in some ways, though, Manchester by the Sea ekes it out.
Can I ask you two very brief questions? How many times have you seen or watched Manchester by the Sea now?
Probably 10.
And why do you watch it more than Moonlight?
Because I love Kenneth Lonergan so much.
Okay.
Yeah, and I know Casey Affleck is scum human in many ways, but I just find Manchester by the Sea, like, it has every aspect of cinema that's supposed to be there. Sure. You know, it has stunning cinematography, it has casual nature, it has a deeply affecting storyline and incredible performances and an inability to communicate, slice of life realism, and it also has humor in a really genuine way. That scene where Casey Affleck and Michelle Williams attempt to communicate when they like meet towards the end of the movie, and just they do not get a single sentence out properly, is maybe the pinnacle of acting for me from the century. Jesus Christ, I've talked so much about Manchester by the Sea. Other ones that were up there for me were Arrival, actually, I thought. Before Midnight was obviously incredible, and maybe my favourite Before movie. And also by Richard Linklater, though I haven't watched it in a while. Boyhood was obviously a cinematic masterpiece. But the one I went for was actually Tree of Life.
Oh, wow, interesting.
Yeah, 2011 even, so it ekes in there. Tree of Life is, for me, just everything that cinema should be. It is challenging, stunningly beautiful, human, and brings you out of yourself and back in. Oh, beautiful. Love it.
Recommendation.
Yeah. So, Joel, what is your favorite movie? It's not. What is the movie that you consider best of the decade? I don't want to hear like what the critical consensus is. I want to hear about Joel McKeever's.
Sure. Well, my biggest challenge here is I don't know what happened in this decade. It's easier with decade than it is with year. I'm absolutely useless at the year.
Everyone's useless at year, to be honest.
But the one my heart went to when I closed my eyes and I pictured was Into the Spider-Verse.
Wow.
For a few reasons. Besides the fact that everyone agrees that it's amazing, but it's the fact that it's a transcending film in the sense that I am not someone who is particularly adept at visual stuff necessarily. I become trained in it, but it's not my natural area, or music, modern music, or anything like that. And yet I can tell how good all those elements are in this. I think it's
very egalitarian in the sense like it makes it very accessible to someone who's not trained in that specific area.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's incredibly unique in terms of its style and its approach. It's a incredibly impressive synthesis of all of the Spider-Man properties, from the various cartoon series, even the recent video game that came out shortly before the film was released, the Tobey Maguire movies, Marvel. It's all Marvel Cinematic Universe. It's all in there.
Yeah,
and it's done something which should have happened a long time ago now, which is put the spotlight on Miles Morales, who is a young boy of color, who is a character from the modern comics, and we keep seeing Peter Parker's origin story in films, and just that shift was really natural and really invigorated. And I also think it digs something which has been really overlooked in the last 10 years, which is that you can do superheroes and should do superheroes vibrantly with tremendous color and tremendous life and happiness and energy, and not this grim dark Superman versus Batman kind of thing. And it gave me a sense of wonder. I felt childlike wonder watching that film, and it made me happier to be here.
Wow.
And it just really, like, I was like, wow, things are great. Like, things we produce wonderful things.
Yep.
And I think that's what those films should do. And I think it's something that people weren't really expecting, and it did it better than films that had 5 times the budget. And
absolutely. Would you rate it as the best Marvel movie over Thor Ragnarok, though?
Yeah, I would, because I think Thor Ragnarok manages to exceed the limitations placed on it by the MCU and the kind of really homogenous style they have sometimes. So it does well against those odds. But Into the Spider-Verse throws out the rule book and writes its own thing entirely, and has a conclusion which is powerful but which is not violent, and which is strong without being toxic. And I just think there's so many things to recommend it. Plus it's funny, and the plot is just like
wacky and fun and exploratory.
I rarely get caught by plot twists anymore, but there's a couple in there where I was like, I didn't see that coming. It's great. Yeah.
Okay. TV show. Best TV show of the decade, Joe.
So I decided to think about a TV show which I am more uniquely positioned to recommend, as opposed to things which are universally or commonly considered to be very good. And I'm going to say Fringe.
Oh wow!
So I've gone with Fringe, which is a procedural kind of science fiction. It's actually a hard show to describe. It starts off as a very episodic modern day science fictional procedural show in the style of an X-Files, but what I think is tremendous about it is that it starts off really gruesome, and it's actually quite daring in terms of some of the transhumanist specifically plots that it puts forward. It transcends that episodic format quite quickly without ever becoming embarrassed by that format, and develops a really complex examination of identity and personality, of using alternate universe theory, and if there's multiple versions of yourself, who is the real you, and all that kind of stuff. And it just has some really exceptional human performances. So I think it really sells the idea of science fiction as a really worthwhile medium, rather than just being something which is pulpy. It has two things going for it which I appreciate. One is it makes me care about heterosexual romance, which is difficult to do, and it's also one of the first things I recommended to you in our relationship, which was like a good recommendation. So I'm like, yes, one in the hole. So yeah, Fringe for me.
Nice. I was very, very close to saying Sharp Objects because I do love it so much. I thought it was incredible and is a hard recommend for me, but definitely The Leftovers has to take it. The Leftovers is just one of the most stunning achievements of television of all time.
So we both recommended science fiction TV shows.
Oh, we did, yeah. Funny enough, the other thing that I have in my mind right now is Watchmen could become that soon enough, because Watchmen, the last week's episode of Watchmen, which was the Hooded Justice episode, was just fucking incredible. So good.
It's kind of flowing on the radar a bit in terms of our social circles. So I often find myself asking, who is watching The Watchmen?
Shut the fuck up. Okay, what is your album of the decade?
So I would say, for me, being not a very musical person, a very musical person, but not a very music driven person. For me, it's No Cities to Love by Sleater Kinney.
So good.
In many ways, fundamentally, because it's one of the first albums that wasn't a compilation of Broadway hits or top 40 skater tracks that I actually listened to like regularly. It was an album that was
released in 2014. So when you were 23.
No, absolutely. I was so very literally and metaphorically tone deaf to this kind of stuff. And this was my way in. This was my gateway, where I listened to it and I listened to it. And I knew every song. I knew the flow of the album. I was like, oh, I get music because of how inviting it was. And I also have very fond memories of it. It was around the time that I started trying to get a bit bigger and do some more exercise, which was a really positive thing for me mentally. I remember listening to it while running across this like incredibly straight and open road in a field in the countryside in Germany, near where my parents live, and just listening to the album running one way and then starting it again and running back. And it's just a really crystallized, like very, very personal moment. And I just felt that Sleater Kinney really, in that album, invited me as someone who isn't cool and doesn't know music to be part of the conversation. And I think it's really perfect for me.
I just love Sleater Kinney so much. They're such wonderful people. Great. So I have more complicated answers to that personally. So I had a couple of different ones that I was bandying about. Heart of a Dog by Laurie Anderson, which is about her rat terrier, and it's a spoken word album, and it's about 70 minutes long. And it's about her dog and her dog dying, and it makes me cry approximately twice a month, I would say.
You do play it while we go to sleep, yeah.
Yep. but it's also about her husband, Lou Reed, who had died the same year. But he's not really mentioned in the album because I think it was too painful for her. But Laurie Anderson is just an incredible artist, so that was really up there for me. Wussy, Attica. Wussy are one of my absolute favorite bands of all time. That's their best album, probably. It's so fucking good. They are the most criminally underappreciated band of all time, I would suggest. Let me think. I think the other ones were, A Crow Looked at Me by Mount Eerie, which is another one that's incredibly depressing. It's about his wife who had just died. He made an album in the weeks following her death from cancer, and about how she had ordered stuff to arrive after her death for their daughter who was going to go to school in a couple of years and all this stuff. And it's just incredibly upsetting, but very, very beautiful. But actually, I think I'm going to give it to, weirdly, and this surprised me, but Modern Vampires of the City by Vampire Weekend.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah, so I've actually just returned to that album so much over the last decade. It's just so well written. It's beautiful, orchestrated, and just beautiful pop noises. And I just think it's a masterpiece. So yeah, there's my album of the decade.
And we will listen to it after we record this.
Do. You'll recognize every song from it. I play it all the time.
So go and check out everything we've spoken about because our taste is fantastic.
Yeah. So very quick note, a programming note, if you don't mind me doing this, Joe.
Please work away.
So over the next couple of weeks, it's going to be Christmas, as you may have noticed, unless you're listening to this in the future, in which case, Happy July. So, or maybe the world has ended. I don't know.
Well, Christmas is traditionally when we celebrate when the powers that be spare us from the sunrise.
Of course. So that means we're going to have a bit of a change in programming over the next couple of weeks. We're going to do about 3 more episodes, I think.
This year. Not ever.
Before the Christmas break. And we'll be throwing up a special episode over the Christmas break at some point, yet to be determined, probably in a pretty unconventional date. And then we'll be back, I'd say, around the first week of January or the 2nd. So look out for us then. We'll firm up the plans when it's closer to the time.
Yeah, and this is a great opportunity to revisit some of our earlier stuff and to see that, our audio quality may have improved, but we were always pretty funny. Yeah. So this week we're talking about Bad Girls. I think your Buffy on Summary is pretty good in terms of what it covered, but basically pivotal, and Buffy loves these, pivotal turning point for the plot arc of the season. And we have Buffy and Faith having their moment of probably closest alignment just before they become the start of their division, which is a very common theme in Buffy. We have the arrival of Wesley Wyndham Price, Buffy's replacement Watcher, and we have the mayor taking front and center now in terms of being the big bag of the season and the road to his ascension really kicking into high gear.
Yeah, absolutely.
So Brian, what did you think of the episode?
Yeah, I like that. It was a little thin content wise, I thought, in one way, as in it felt like a gateway episode rather than a specifically self-contained, well-written episode onto itself. But I deeply enjoy it. I like the lesbianism mainly. So this episode is super fucking flirty between Faith and Buffy. I would imagine this episode launched 1,000 ships.
Very good. My understanding is this particular one is called Fuffy.
Oh, is it? I haven't heard it before.
Yeah, I've seen hashtag Fuffy on many of the fan sites.
Don't like that
blogs.
Don't like that word.
But we've talked about this before. But I think in intentionally, unintentionally, subtextually, there's a lot of homoerotic tension between the two Slayers, and there's very much a strong demonstration in this episode that fundamentally that Faith understands Buffy on some level in a way that her friends can't, or Buffy very much feels that Faith is the key to a certain primal, a certain id, a certain energy that she clearly tries to keep really regulated during her normal life.
The opening of the episode is Faith pushing Buffy to be like, "Oh, you're saying you've never?" And Buffy's like, "What? No, I would never." And Faith's like, "Are you sure? You definitely should try it sometime," or something. Well, she doesn't say you should try it sometime. She's like, "Are you sure? I can't believe you've never even thought about it." And it very much sounds like Faith is trying to persuade Buffy to have sex with the woman, essentially. And that reads great. But then she's like, "No, I've never had sex with Xander."
Yeah.
And that's like, okay, cool. But if you look at it a little bit further, Faith's probing because she knows that Buffy has just slept with because she's just slept with Xander. So there's a little bit of like Eskimo sister thing going on there, but also there's a little or a hoped for Eskimo sister, but there's also a little bit like of that kind. I don't know, that gave me like heavy bisexual energy of like wanting it's like a sexual connection there between the two of them.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a thing of Faith wanting to deepen her connection with Buffy and not really being able to articulate that in any way that's vulnerable, and this being potentially some way that she can do so. And I think there is, as much as Faith, becomes characterized going forward because of her recklessness, I think there is something positive to what Faith is trying to do, in the sense of, I think there are positive notes to her trying to get Buffy to engage with, accepting herself. Another obvious but well-crafted metaphor: don't fight against the fact that Slayers are here to kill the undead. Accept that as part of yourself, and enjoy what you're doing. And yeah, that it requires and demands a lot of passionate emotion that Buffy is really scared of accessing. Yeah. And obviously, as we see, this trend is downsides to that as well. But I do think she wants Buffy to be, as far as Faith understands, fully actualized.
Absolutely. So I mean, while Faith represents, that like what abandon, Buffy can definitely take a page out of Faith's book in a very healthy way. She needs to let go of herself more. She needs to enjoy herself more. She needs to engage what it is actually to be the Slayer and how to enjoy it. That's 100% what Faith represents. Now Faith obviously does go down such a dark path, specifically starting this episode, but we'll get to that, I suppose.
Yeah, and they do a lot of emphasis in these early Faith and Buffy episodes to highlight all the synchronized slaying. Particularly like in this episode that Faith calls them the Chosen Two. Yeah,
that's nice.
But there's a kind of a serious point to that as well, which is, as we said, that a lot about what happens with the Slayers is about keeping these women isolated, unable to learn from each other, unable to develop independently. And I think when you see in the context of Wesley arriving and trying to reassert the dominance of the council, and Buffy not really needing that because she has a strong male father figure in her life, she has a strong relationship with another Slayer, she has an established friend group, that is anathema to what the council want to achieve with the Slayers. So I think this is in some ways the pinnacle for the time being of Buffy's personal independence, and then conflicting with her sense of responsibility, because her argument with Faith is that this is the job, we have to do what the council tells us to some extent. And I think Faith, although the rest of it goes downhill, does instill in her the idea of maybe no.
That's one of the beauties of this show, is that they rarely will write a character who exists purely as a foil. There'll never be a character who represents temptation that isn't a just temptation.
Yeah.
That's bad writing. What they'll do is they'll create a fully realized character who represents a genuine desire of Buffy's. So obviously we are very quick to read Faith in this episode as a shadow self of Buffy. In the way that Buffy's shadow self in Cordelia very much concluded in Homecoming, when Cordelia became her own character, in some ways kind of separated from Buffy on the basis of Buffy having let go of that part of herself.
Yeah.
I feel also, though, that Faith is highlighted in this episode in part because in Helpless, Buffy so well integrated her human self. So Cordelia represented the shadow self of Buffy's humanity. Well, not humanity, her human life, given that Cordelia so much represented
her mortality, maybe.
Mortality for sure, but her life before becoming the Slayer, because that is what Cordelia is Buffy if she'd never become the Slayer.
Mundanity.
Yeah, sure, exactly. And then in Helpless, she accepted that human side of herself, and she was able to be Buffy while also being just human. Whereas Faith deeply represents Buffy's Slayer persona and her shadow Slayer, the one that wants to be wild, reckless, and that does enjoy in slaying a bit more than she wants to admit, as we see in this episode. And that's going to be something that's really important in this season going on, is watching Faith represent Buffy's hurt and her being hurt because of having been a Slayer, and watching Buffy try to integrate that through Faith.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think one of the things to be very careful whenever talking about other Slayers is the message is never that Buffy is strong and these other women aren't. And that Buffy was able to be well adjusted because she was just a proper good girl and not, you know, weak or sinful or reckless in the way these other timid or whatever the particular advice you want to ascribe to them. Buffy in many ways had the opportunities that Faith didn't, that Kendra didn't, that no other Slayer had, that Nikki Wuggs definitely didn't have, that, you know, the first Slayer didn't have. And the show really makes a prolonged character study of the concept of duality, but specifically the balance in that duality, in the sense of you can't have the Slayer side without the human balance. But we often see so many power characters accept the penalty of whatever their particular curse is, or their particular burden, so they're strong enough to be who they need to be. Even in this episode, Wesley represents a Giles.
He represents
a Giles with in many ways the humanity removed. He is just the archetype. He is, and it's something that Joss Whedon references a number of times, this old Star Trek episode where Kirk is split into good Kirk and bad Kirk by the transporter, and bad Kirk is like really aggressive and angry. He's the it. And he's very violent, but good Kirk turns out to actually be too timid. And the moralistic resolution is they need to be recombined because Kirk needs his fire as well as his peacefulness, his pacificity. Yes,
Star Trek was taking from...
You can make whatever hoity-toity reference you want, because the fact is people aren't referencing Lacan or whoever. They're referencing that episode of the original series of Star Trek.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Realistically. But yeah, so, and that's what, you know, Faith is here. Like, Faith is not... and maybe you disagree with me on this, maybe we can talk about this. I don't think Faith is a murderer in the sense of ipso facto becomes a murderer by killing someone. But I think she made a mistake that Buffy could have made if she was a bit more reckless. It's very for want of a nail. There go I.
Well, what does that bring to mind, of course, is Ted from last season. Look at Buffy's reaction in that episode versus Faith's reaction. Buffy immediately phones the police.
Yeah.
I mean, like, maybe, like, obviously her mother experienced it with her, so sure, she might have not done that if it was just by herself. But I think
she would have done it.
I think she would have. And the person who punishes Buffy the most in that episode for having killed Ted is Buffy.
Well, see, this is the thing. It's like, you know, tragedy happens, but Buffy as a person, both a show, emphasizes the idea that it's how you respond to things that matters. And the issue here, fundamentally, beyond the obvious tragedy of Alan Finch being killed,
tragedy-ish.
It's tragedy. He's a human person who hasn't specifically done anything particularly sinister.
He's planning with the mayor to destroy the world.
No.
To bring hell to Earth. Is that it?
I think he just wants to be a big snake.
I'm sure. I think it's counted as an apocalypse.
Sure, no, it absolutely is, and I'm sure there's further plans where, as a big snake, he wants to rule the world. But the weird thing with the mayor is his motivation is really centered in the idea of becoming the snake, and everything else is kind of incidental. Like, he'll be happy once he is the snake, and and there's power and immortality and all that kind of stuff that comes with that. But he really wants to be a big snake.
He really does.
But no, we're not going to argue that just because Deputy Finch is like doing unhelpful things that he deserves to die, because that's not the argument we're having here.
To die, so but I think when they find out who he is, aren't they a bit okay with it when they find out that he was like...
But see, this is the issue with Buffy as a program, because they are approaching this thing with Faith, and because they want to make this distinction between Faith and Buffy, and Faith as the rogue slayer, they have this really firm verbalized idea that Buffy doesn't kill, and the slayers don't kill, they don't murder, they slay, and that there's this distinction of what deserves to live and what's human and what's not human, like a Superman like code of honor kind of thing. And we've seen that Buffy does kill people who ostensibly, by my definition, are very close to being like, if Clem is a person, and if it would be wrong to kill Clem because he's a nice demon in later seasons, or or it would be wrong to kill Angel in some ways because he's like a good guy right now.
Sure.
Then it's definitely wrong for Xander to have like dropped a vending machine on that zombie's head in the last episode because he was fully cogent. And, even though he was like a bad guy.
For me, the person who's really like, question mark was earlier in the season. I can't remember the name of the episode. Oh wait, no, can I? Beauty and the Beasts. The kid who was just like getting rage shacked.
Oh yeah, 100%.
He was just a teenager, but then again, Angel killed him, so.
And he was feral at the time, so it was like a romanticized Beauty and the Beast thing happening. But I actually say but I have to say the mayor stuff for me is some of the best apocalypse stuff. I don't know if there's any of the later apocalypses that really get me as well as the first three do. I think they're perfectly serviceable devices in many ways, but everything about the mayor becoming an old one, and it is in this text an old one, he becomes Overcan, opening the box with the spiders in it, being split in half, all of that stuff is like really, that is an apocalypse for me. This is the good old Lovecraft
fair stuff. But Joel, you have to give some credence to, not credence, you have to give some,
what are you trying to say?
You have to give some credit to season 5. Glory's apocalypse that she's bringing is terrifying. The end of season 5 scares me.
Oh yeah, absolutely, because season 5 does something which I don't think any of the subsequent seasons do in quite the same way, which is to make Glory a credible threat.
Yeah.
It's
Adam I never believed as a threat, really.
No, and the only way you make people like Adam or the trio or even Willow to a degree a threat is by the narrative artificially saying, oh, but they did beat her in this room, or they are going to end the world. But Glory and the mayor, I think, credibly seems like someone who is actually just a league above what they're trying to deal with. But no, I like the mayor. I love the genteel, distinctly American threat that he poses.
Yeah.
And it's something that could be played very cloyingly. And I actually think Harry Gronger, which isn't a surname I've ever been confident pronouncing, Harry Gronger, does a really balanced job and really gets center stage from this episode forward. So I think it's really enjoyable just to watch him in a scene. He's one of these Buffy actors where it's like I just want to watch him talk for a bit.
Oh, he's great. We were saying during the episode that we weren't sure who the Balthazar actor was, or you didn't recognize him. He was Abel Kuntz from Veronica Mars.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense, actually. I kind of recognize his voice a little bit.
So he's the guy who basically gives himself in as the murderer of Lily Kane in season 1, but Veronica figures out that he actually couldn't have done it, and he's dying of cancer, and they're trying to give his daughter money, essentially. A
little sleuth, Veronica.
Yeah. He also won an Emmy Award for Best Guest Actor in Boston Legal, which I watched a little bit of, but it wasn't great.
What did you think of the demon in this episode, Balthazar?
He was gross. He was so gross. He was a big sludge in a big tank because he had the mayor.
Did you pick up on this? Because it's actually a little subtly suggested, but that basically 100 years ago he came into conflict with the mayor who was alive at the time and who I would imagine cursed him to make him morbidly obese.
No, so he says that he was
crippled by him.
Crippled by him, exactly. So he says, like, it sounds to me just like basically he's immobile, so that's why he's become obese, is that he can't exercise.
Potentially, when we say morbidly obese, like specifically, like fantastically, Brothers Grimm, fully immobile.
Yeah, and not morbidly, funnily enough. It doesn't look like it's going to kill him anytime soon.
No, I think that's actually a term that's used in the wiki, which is why it's in my brain, but it's also a clinical term, I think.
Of course, yeah.
I believe. I'm no expert. But, yeah, my interpretation would be that's a common thing that happens sometimes in fantasy texts or in fairy tales, that people, when they are cursed specifically, is to become, very obese and immobile in this way. But yeah, it was an interesting one. It kind of laid the idea that, very kind of obliquely, that the mayor has been
around for a long time,
been around and been coming into conflict with demons for a very long time.
Yeah, which is interesting. Otherwise, I actually found the monster of the week to be reasonably lacking in bite. there was nothing specifically interesting about it. They didn't feel like it represented a really significant threat. It was kind of Knights of the Crusade kind of thing going on. And
this is the thing, is that Buffy as a show, I wish I could play a way I could say Buffy where you could hear the italics, but Buffy the program has done so much work to present the idea of this old world, because these are Knights of Byzantium or whatever. No, it's the 15th century order of duelists called the Eliminati.
Illuminati. I love that so much.
The whole point is it presents these people as not a threat, because Buffy has the modern edge and the linguistic edge and all that. So if you introduce someone as using swords and fighting with honor and dueling, you know that she's going to kill them. Mm-hmm. But interestingly, what does happen in this conflict is she is, as we've said, being drawn entirely at her own will into Fate's way of doing things, and Fate trying to engage her in, that iconic scene of Faith arriving during the chem test that Buffy hasn't prepared for and drawing the love heart and the steam on the window.
So wonderful.
Getting her to come out. They break into a vampire's nest during the day, burn the place down. It is inarguable, I think, that Buffy is genuinely enjoying herself, and there is an enjoyment that she does have to reckon with there.
And then they go dancing, and they are just like fucking loving life, and that scene is just so iconic, the two of them dancing together. And it was it was homaged in X-Men Evolution, which I think is such a great little thing that they did. X-Men Evolution did a bunch of things like that. It's actually a very good it's the second best X-Men cartoon after X-Men the animated series, of course, but they also do shot-for-shot remakes of shots from The Craft and from Never Been Kissed and stuff like that, which is kind of cool. Yeah,
really, like that kind of X-Men combined with Buffy references, interpolation with each other is really chef's kiss.
Yeah.
But the interesting thing, I think, is you have Buffy being drawn down this path, and I don't think there's anything sinister about what Faith is doing. I think Faith needs more structure because of the trauma she has. Absolutely. I don't think there's anything sinister about what she does up until this point. But she leads Buffy into the sewers, into a dangerous situation, and one of the vampires drowns her. Drowns Buffy. Now, I don't think that he actually does drown her. I think she does play dead, and she talks that in that moment she feels a term you've actually come to use a lot, which is the Slayer force flowing through her, and she just becomes completely one with her combat instincts, revives herself, quote unquote, from being drowned, grabs a sword and defeats him, and feels that like satisfaction of winning the battle. What do you think? I think this is very interesting scene. I think this adds a lot to her as a Slayer and as a combatant.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't read into it too much. I suppose there's always that suggestion of like accessing a kind of flow where you forget the self and become one with what you're doing, where you a kind of a mindlessness which allows you to perform better. What were you thinking there?
Well, I think just such a specific choice, and she references it herself, saying that she hates when they drown her, that if you're going to tie it to a moment of her,
of course,
focus and realization, or at least feeling that, oh no, I have this, tying it to when the master kills her, I think is not a game-changing situation, but I think it's a very interesting note to add to her, which is there's so many situations. It's like the snake metaphor. The metaphor that you've used before, which is basically that.
It's so hard to explain, but basically a psychologist was like, this guy was experiencing hallucinations of snakes, and the psychologist brought him to a room and said, look, there are some snakes, and he was like, what the fuck, why would you bring me to a room with real snakes? And he says, well, look at those snakes, you can tell the difference between those and the fake snakes. And the idea there is that in some ways you can trust yourself when you don't think you can, to know the difference between real and fake problems.
Yeah, so
not fake, but like real and
exaggerated. Yeah, and basically that you don't know if you're right, but you know when you're wrong. And I think we see this a lot with Buffy, where she does experience a lot of verbalized doubt, and she loses. She's very like paladin-like in the way that her own strength is tied to her faith in herself and her faith in what she's doing, and she does vary on that faith a lot. I shouldn't use faith; it's going to be confusing in this context. But that belief a lot. But in moments like this, when she needs it, when she really needs to know what she's doing, she has absolute clarity of purpose. And I just think this is a real examination of how Buffy, like Faith, I'm very clear about this. Faith is not an evil Slayer.
No.
She's not an evil person. And Buffy is not without fault. And this is really about how they are two people, I think, in a scenario who make different choices. And of course, title of next episode with consequences coming from that. But no, I think Faith is one of the most interesting shadow selves or mirror images of a character in kind of any context I can think of, because she is such a complex, and because they have these shared issues of oppression in terms of how the council and men treat them, and in terms of their position as a weapon and trying to determine some kind of female identity through that. Yeah,
it's great. So we mentioned this briefly earlier, but Wesley arrives. It is insane to think that the Wesley in this episode is the Wesley that comes to be in Angel. I remember when I watched Angel with you originally, I hadn't watched it before, and you were like, oh no, Wesley becomes a great character. He's so good. He becomes Wes, and he's like a badass. And I was like, yeah, sure. And like, I refuse to refer to him as Wes at any point. But Alexis Denisov does an amazing job of bringing that character from a very immature, very silly place to a genuinely well-realized, very traumatized character.
Yeah, absolutely. And like Wesley, obviously in this episode, is now that Giles has been let go by the council, this is giving Giles and Anthony Head permission to deviate his character from that stereotype by placing him in opposition with someone who can now take over that more kind of tea and crumpets role. And we do specifically see Giles looking at Wesley, and we hear him, in his head saying, "Was that what I look like? That's how I'm perceived?" And starting to move away from that.
Absolutely. I'm gonna really enjoy Wesley for the rest of the season. I think he's a funny, stupid character. So I'm looking forward to it. Okay. Joel, are you happy to move into the dusting?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's do some synchronized slayage here.
Okay, cool. I have a couple of Buffy bits for you. Okay. Did you know that Alexis Denisov marries Alison Hannigan?
I have heard this.
Yeah. So apparently she was very attracted to him from when he walked on set for the first time, and she asked him out quite quickly, and he said no because he didn't date co-workers. But they were obviously married by the time the show, all the shows finished. So that's
probably nice. A year after this, I think they started dating.
Yeah, so 2003 they got married as well. Oh, very important note. Did you notice what I noted about what Faith was doing in the last scene?
She was washing her clothes.
What was she trying to do?
Wash the blood out of it.
Yeah, so it's another filthy Shakespeare reference. Lady Macbeth, out, damn spot, a representation of her guilt having killed King Duncan. Very appropriate.
I will point out that in the scene where she is mauling her clothes to get the blood out, there's no blood visible on those clothes.
There is it is pure white. Yeah. It is very, very upsetting as a visual reference. Yeah. Really well done though. Like, that's one of those Shakespeare references I'm just like, absolutely.
Not as upsetting as the intended end of this episode.
Yeah, so originally when they had plotted Faith's character arc, this episode was supposed to be the episode where she dies. Buffy goes to Faith's motel at the end of the episode, and Faith has hanged herself in the original intention for this, before Faith's character was expanded. And holy fuck, that would have been the most upsetting episode of this show.
Yeah, that sounds like the kind of plot you agreed on a creepypasta website of, the lost episode of Buffy. I remember seeing this late at night after my parents went to sleep. I never found a copy of it. But that would have been a terrible choice, because then you have... Now, I know Slayers die, and I know that's the whole thing, but
it would have been a worse portrayed Faith, if you get me, because the reason they expanded Faith's role was that Elijah Dushku was so good in it. So,
but like having Kendra die the way she did, and then having Faith, it's like you can't just have in a show that's about
respecting women,
women's agency. You can't have a revolving door of gruesomely killed Slayers.
But if you think about it, I can see the idea there, in the sense that in the same way that Snyder was supposed to be the next of a line, like how interesting would that be if Buffy was the mainstay and other Slayers come and go as Slayers tend to do? Like, the fact that Buffy and Faith survive so long is incredibly unusual. Like, either of them should have died much sooner. But
you need to be so careful with that.
It would have been such an awful idea for the show. But I can see why they would be tempted to do that. Do you have any Buffy bits, Joel?
Yeah, so when Wesley arrives, and there's a whole thing about Wesley and why he's a watcher, and his father was apparently very abusive in this part of his later character arc, but he's very much talking about how the Watchers Council has modernized, And he talks about how he has fought 2 vampires himself in controlled circumstances. And we actually do start to see this with the council, that they have more practical black ops teams and stuff like that. But he asks for the Watcher Diaries from Giles. Now, Giles has shown the Watcher Diaries in an episode previously, and they were like dozens and dozens of books. But the ones that Wesley has is only a few, including Giles's. And the theory for this is that a lot of them were probably burnt during the Hansel and Gretel episode.
Oh, really?
Yeah, the book burning. So these are the books he managed to save, including an entry from, which I thought was quite interesting from a lower point of view, that his first entry in the Watcher's Diary from the Welcome to the Hellmouth time was that the Slayer is willful and insolent, and her abuse of the English language is such that I only understand every second sentence she speaks. And just to see that kind of character progression, I think is interesting. I also like the scene when Buffy and Faith rob the sporting goods store and they're arrested by the cops. They break out the car. The cop car, I think, is quite iconic. But also the cops ask if they're part of one of those girl gangs, which I feel is like another explanation for why weird shit happens in Sunnydale. And
wild roving packs of women just beating up men and biting their neck until they bleed.
Exactly. It'd be like something you see on Twitter about, like, you know, that in the 1940s there was a girl gangs called the Tommy Lags, who would like have switchblades and weird haircuts and you know, anyway, be like amazing. But there was a thing that Buffy said which triggered a immediate and visceral flashback for me.
Oh yeah, which
was Wesley saying the 3 most important words for a Slayer are preparation, 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 and Buffy says that's one word 3 times. And I think I heard that and said that to people for about a decade in inappropriate situations. I feel like that came right up from the gloom in the base of my brain. It's like, I remember stealing this, the moment of this theft.
Wow.
I can't get the plug out of my shirt while I watch this scene.
Oh, God. Okay, fashion notes. Joel, Wesley is wearing the worst suit anyone has ever worn of all time, which is very unusual in one way because it's a specifically American cut suit, which I don't think Wesley would necessarily wear. But obviously you're not going to go and find British cut suits, because the British cut of a suit is much different to an American cut. The American cut emphasizes boxiness, square shoulders, all that stuff. But you know what I was thinking? And he wears one of those shirts where it's like a white collar and like a striped blue like body, and it just looks awful. But I was looking at the back of his suit. I'm 90% certain that he has his vents still sewn shut. Oh, tragic. Yeah. The greatest tragedy of the season. Okay, if you are a person who wears suits or jackets out there, please look at the back of your suit. There is supposed to be a flap there that comes apart. It comes to you when you've bought it, stitched very lightly at the very bottom, usually in a square with an X through it. You have to cut open those stitches so that the vents, the flaps can flap about. That is the intended purpose. If you buy a suit as well and the pockets are sewn shut, you should open those as well. I have gone through the period of thinking I had incredibly shallow pockets, and we all go through it. You have to pull those little stitches. You do. And I'll tell you this, we all learned this the hard way. The chances are, if you wear a suit, if you're a person who wears a suit and a shirt, they probably don't fit you. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, that's Wesley's problem here. You need to actually find out what your size is. You need to wear shirts and suit jackets and trousers that fit you properly. It will change your life. Yeah. Change my life. I really hated his little glasses too. They're gross. They're just little and very thin rimmed, which I know was the idea back in the day in the 90s. And I certainly desired very thin rims when I was wearing glasses around the early 90s. But it does not look good. Faith is wearing very beautiful dark lipstick throughout the episode, and I just think it looks so fucking good on her. She's so modern, and she's just so beautiful and youthful and energetic, and wonderful woman. Oz has dyed his hair jet black, and is also wearing like a green shirt and yellow green t-shirt and yellow shirt, and he looks like he's the alternate colored version of himself in a fighting game. It doesn't suit him. Yeah, I won't pass judgment on anyone's particular choices, but I don't quite understand that thing where redhead people dye their hair jet black specifically. Yeah, it's something we see because I've heard a lot of redheaded people here, and I never really followed. Well, think about it. If you dye your hair blue and you already have orange hair, what color does it go, Joel?
Don't ask me. We had this problem before.
Like-
I don't know colours.
Like brown, essentially.
Brown,
Browny
okay.
green, to be honest. Cordelia also joins the Xander Harris hate cast, which is nice because she also has criticism for Xander's clothes. And she says, well, Xander, because he says that she's wearing hooker wear, which, I mean, wow. But she says, well, Xander, I could dress more like you, but unlike you, my father has a job.
It's absolutely savage.
It is the most savage thing anyone has said to another person. And then Xander's like struggling for someone to respond. And he's like, I'm going to think of something amazing later and I'll tell you.
Yeah.
And I'll come back. And very importantly, what he's saying is he's going to have l'esprit de l'escalier, which is my favorite French phrase, which means the spirit of the staircase. And it's when you think of a great comeback hours later.
Yeah. And another thing. But yeah, no, absolutely. Cordelia goes for him. I will tell you, Brian, in this episode of Buffy, a man was brutally murdered and it was not Alan Finch.
Yep, it was Xander Harris. Do you have any fashion notes there, Joe?
Yeah, just we have this terrible fashion of the vampires, the Byzantine vampires, wearing these quilts
Templar,
or whatever.
Yeah,
It
ponchos.
it doesn't look good. It looks cheap. It's cheap costuming. I'm not a fan of it. The only other thing I would note is Faith always looks great in her kind of leather pants, her white tank top. It's a very fetching look for Eliza Dushku. Buffy once again turns up, ding dong, Avon lady in her church outfit to give a proclamation in the motel room.
Yeah, she didn't have a little bag this time, thankfully, but yeah.
No, she had bouffant hair. She was wearing Marge's Chanel suit, tailored for another confrontation. I stand her consistency in this particular thing that she's doing.
Did you notice her broken fringe is still being brushed to the side?
Terrible tragedy indeed.
Okay, death count there, please, Joe.
Yeah,
actually quite a few, I think.
So yeah, we 4 Eliminati vampires dusted by Buffy, 3 by Faith, a vampire nest which was set on fire by the Chosen 2.
So unknown amount of deaths, presumably.
Giles, who manages to kill one of the vampires. Giles does some pretty handy combat in this episode.
I think it's specifically to point out how bad Wesley is.
Yeah, and I would also say that when Wesley joins Angel, he tries to use 2 revolvers, 2 semi-automatics. Balthazar, who is the demon who is electrocuted by Buffy when she tosses a live wire into a tub of water. Vincent, who is Balthazar's head vampire, who is killed by Mr. Trick after the mayor uses him to demonstrate the fact that he cannot be split in half with a sword, or he can, but he survives it. He's now immortal for the next 100 days. And finally, Deputy Mayor Alan Finch murdered by Faith Lahane.
Indeed. Okay, I have my rating out of 10. Do you want to hear it?
I really do.
Okay, I have another one for you in case you have the same one, because I suspect you do. But I'm going to give it 8 out of 10 Eliminati.
Okay, tell me about that.
I thought it was good. I think it mainly sets up the next episode. I can see this being a double episode in some ways.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Didn't have any specifically brilliant moments of stagecraft or writing, but very good fun. Love watching Buffy and Faith dance and just be iconic and wonderful.
Absolutely. I'm going to give this 8.3 calorie-free mom waffles.
Oh, beautiful.
For a lot of the same reasons. I think this is just a really solid episode of Buffy. I think the thing about it for me is it sounds like Buffy. It reads. Everyone's in their own voice. Everyone's comfortable. The relationships you see the payoff for relationships between Buffy and Willow, between Buffy and Giles, between Cordelia and Xander. Things that built over 3 seasons. This is why you layer things well, because this feels real. I'm giving a bump up to 8.3 because I like Xander in this episode.
Yeah, it's
I'm wondering, is the Zeppel a turning point for him being like a tolerable doofus as opposed to a misogynist?
So all he needs to do is call someone a hooker and you're on Team Xander.
That is not the soundbite I will be using for this episode, I'll tell you that much.
Okay, we should wrap up. I just want to say quickly, Tara in work, who I work with, has been consistently listening to Buffy Boys and giving actually really, really lovely feedback. And I keep meaning to give her a shout out, brief one. And I keep forgetting. But thank you so much, Tara.
Thank you, Tara.
It's great of you to listen. And I can't believe you bought Pokemon Shield this weekend, given you already have put in 60 hours into Pokemon Sword. What is wrong with you?
Dedication.
Yeah.
To the craft.
Okay.
We should watch the craft soon.
Oh, we should, yeah.
So thanks very much for listening. I enjoyed it. Brian, you look like you enjoyed yourself.
That's okay.
I hope you, the dear listener, enjoyed it and my sultry, dulcet tones. We will see you next time for episode 15 of season 3, which is Consequences. So we really appreciate if you enjoy this episode, tweet us and let us know. And if you'd be ever so kind to leave a review on your podcast app of choice, tell your friends, tell your roving girl gangs, and we will see you next time on Buffy Boys.
Hey Buffy, Buffy. It's supposed to be green eggs and shallow ham. Wait, what is it called?
Oh yeah.
Gross.
Buffy Boys. Bye now.
See ya.